what of myself do I cherish that I can give to this, that it might bring forth life? And if we orient ourselves towards the landscape and the soil in that regard, we're going to make advancement for sure.
We have got to build in that resilience as a risk management factor, because that's ultimately what we're into, soil health.
Hi, and welcome to the Ag Podcast. I'm Crystal Mackay, and I'm thrilled to be your host, guiding us through some thought-provoking discussions on agriculture with experts from the ground up. Yes, farm puns are always intended on this show. According to the Food and Agriculture Association of the United Nations, the agriculture land area of the planet is approximately 5 billion hectares. About 1/3 of that is used as cropland, and the remaining 2/3 of that is used for meadows and grazing livestock. That's the big picture. But now let's look at the very foundation of that: dirt, ground, soil. It's been said that our entire population on planet Earth depends on a thin layer of topsoil. Just think about that for a minute. We're here to discuss why this age-old topic of soil has become such a hot topic with a couple of leading experts in the field. Again, I can't help myself with farm puns. Joining us from his farm in Centerville, New Brunswick is Cedric MacLeod. In addition to farming, Cedric is the executive director of the Canadian Forage Growers Association and manages several projects with ag sustainability and the role of healthy soils in resilient farming systems. And from Irricana, Alberta, we have Tim Wray. He is a cattle rancher and winner of the Environmental Stewardship Award. Thank you both for joining us, and let's dig in. Tim, soil health is a really broad term that we've been hearing a lot about lately. What are the cornerstone aspects of soil health from your point of view?
There's these 5 basic soil health principles that pretty near are standard at every ag seminar or description of what soil health is. And it's just when the ground has these attributes. So the ground is covered, so it's not exposed bare like a wound on the skin. It's covered. When there's limited chemical use, obviously in modern agriculture, there's lots of chemical options, and in soil health, you try to limit that. There's diverse plants above and below ground. There's diversity of species, limited tillage, but that has to do with keeping it covered. And then photosynthetic capacity. So, is what's above ground alive and active? So, forgive me if I've got the 5 things not quite right, but those are the basic things. The ground is alive and the soil is alive, and it requires this exchange with the air and the sun, and that's mediated by plants. And if we understand that, we can start to pick out where the ground is healthy.
Cedric, chime in. Does that resonate with you? How do you define soil health?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Tim did a great job. So when I started my journey in ag, it was really around soil health and the sustainability of the soil resource. Growing up here in Carleton County, this is Potato Central. The birthplace of the McCain's group. So, spuds are an important part of our economy, but they're hard on the soil. And so I saw this impact of, to Tim's point, limited cover, lots of tillage, soil in the rivers. So that's why I chose my career path in soil science ultimately to kind of tackle that. So when I think about soil health, I go back to those 3 principles, right? Chemical, biological, and physical. And so to Tim's point, all those practices that we're putting in, reducing our tillage, keeping the aggregates in check, right? Keeping it covered, lots of root exudates, lots of organic matter in the system, good diversity, ideally with perennials. Perennial forages, are a huge life giver to the soil based on organic matter and the interactions with microbial communities. But as we've moved through the new thing, I'm giving it a bit of an air quote because some of us have been doing this no-till thing for a long time, right? But now it's become mainstream, and that's great. And now we're thinking about these principles. What it really comes down to is resilience. Soil health to me is, how is that soil going to react to excessive water or excessive periods of hot, dry weather, right? And the ability of the soils to flex and continue to do its function in extreme weather events is really how I define soil health, which all the pieces that Tim had talked about kind of envelop in that.
Love it. Great context, Cedric. Thank you. Tim, your ranch won an environmental stewardship award. Congratulations on that. Can you share some specific examples of what you're doing on your farm to improve soil health?
Sure. Well, and if I could just tell it as a story of happenstance discovery, it really sort of explains what's going on. So around the turn of the last 1,000-year era, 2000 or so, my farm that I wasn't part of at the time, I was off at university, two-stepping and studying agriculture. So those on the farm realized we're not big enough to afford that next combine. So either we got to grow or we got to do something different. And my uncle, who was the primary manager of the farm, loved cattle. So he said, you know what? Let's get rid of the iron and let's just go gangbusters with cattle. And so he wanted to grow cattle. Well, what he needed in order to do that, he needed forages. And where we are on the prairies, you can grow grass and it'll cure off and you can graze it just about any time of the year. So long story short, we went from a mixed farm to a cattle ranch. And so the ground got covered with these perennial forages. And then these cattle were just moved across the landscape very intensively. That was sort of the genius that my uncle had was, let's move these cattle. And so he took a number of courses and got involved with a network. And he thought he was growing cattle. But then in order to have the cattle, he realized, I got to grow grass. And as he managed the grass, which required moving the cattle, then he realized, oh, wow, I'm feeding microbes. I'm feeding soil. And because some research had started, back in, as Cedric pointed out, there's been people that have been at this a couple of decades. Researchers started coming around looking for farmers who were doing this intensively managed rotational grazing. And they were correlating that with soil health and such. And so just by discovery, they realized, wow, by having those soil health principles in place, the ground cover, diverse species, pressure and regrowth, all that stuff that happens with rotational grazing, pulsing the land, you get better soil. And so we went from being cattle farmers to soil farmers just because of that. So what's happening around here is just what I described, more of that, mixed species, moving cattle, pulsing the land, and letting it photosynthesize as much as possible.
Cedric, like me, you've got your farm background, but you also work with a lot of associations and farmers and ranchers across the country on these projects. Why isn't everyone on this soil health train? Like, what are some of the barriers to implementing some of the things that Tim talked about as an example?
This is evolution, right? Change comes hard in any sector. And, we're a resilient bunch in this sector, but also pretty cautious and conservative. So I always like to couch these things within the context of evolution and not change, because a change is the dinosaurs, a change is the asteroid, right? Evolution, things come slow, steady, like Tim's story, right? When Doug said we're going to ditch the combine and put the cattle out and graze and grow forages, and over time, things come around. I think what we're seeing now is a more direct tie within the value chain, and consumers, are paying a bit more attention, and they've got their concerns, they've got their demands, and so our value chain stakeholders are stepping to the plate, and it's become part of branding and what we do. But I think it's also a recognition, to Tim's point, there have been folks sounding this alarm for a long time. Thinking about, Don Law, David Law, Li Shang, these researchers that have been saying, hey, listen, and their colleagues around the world, hey, listen, the degradation that's happening within our current system is not sustainable. It's not going to work. And now you start to layer in climate change and extended droughts and extended wetness, right? I guess it's a bit of a light bulb moment for some folks to say, oh, yeah, right, I guess that is correct. That is where we're headed. We have got to build in that resilience as a risk management factor, because that's ultimately what we're into with soil health, right? As I mentioned before, how are these soils going to relate to the climate, especially as it changes, right? So I think that's a very clear recognition, and I think historically, ag, it's been, up until the last 10, 15 years, it was a tough slog, right? Guys and gals were just trying to hang on, do what they knew they could do best, with a little bit more profitability. I think we're seeing some evolution. We're starting to see that evolution, but it comes hard, and I really think it's taking the value chain to say, listen, when you deliver your corn product to the terminal, we need to understand what that practice is, because our buyers are asking for it, right? So it's all flowing through, and it's a shared responsibility. I think it's not good enough for the food processor to say, well, that's your issue, I'm going to make food over here. It's all of our issue, because the nation that destroys its soil destroys itself.
Yeah, and you have to feed yourself, right? So this definitely, we're seeing a lot more dots connected across the food system, right? Where before we were, again, I can't help myself, but all in silos, saying I'm going to do what I do on my farm, and food service and retail are far away. And now, there's a lot of questions up and down the supply chains.
Yeah, just a comment, and I want to pick up on Tim, because his uncle Doug used to speak landscape, right? And I picked up that landscape. And I think, to your point, Crystal, on the collaboration and silos, as farmers, we're individual landowners, but we manage a landscape as a whole, right? And so the work that Tim's doing upstream of maybe an annual crop neighbor, right? Protecting those stream banks, creating that carbon store, creating that biodiversity, right? There's a bit of an offset. So we're all working at this together to manage the landscape as a whole.
Yeah, love that. If you like what you've heard so far, please like and subscribe and share this podcast with your circles. And don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you're thinking, what's on your mind on this topic. Tim, just picking up on what Cedric said around barriers, anything to share around barriers that you've seen on your ranch or neighboring ranches, and maybe some resources or programs that can help overcome those things.
Well, every farmer knows this is a very capital intensive industry. And that's a huge barrier. I guess I would like to say you can't do regenerative agriculture with extractive finance. And if you have a banker that insists on getting their payments every year, or if you have a landlord that keeps ratcheting up, those land rents, creates a lot of pressure. And it's sort of this thing that we live in and won't name. But if you have extractive finance, it makes it very hard to do regenerative ag. Fortunately, there are some people that are beginning to wake up to this. It's not a one and done, but I am working with a group that's looking at how do we capitalize regenerative farms. And so there is quite a network of organizations that are starting to look at this. Everything from corporate banks who realize, wow, we want to give reduced interest rates to farmers that can show us regenerative indicators in their, say, soil tests. So all of a sudden you're coming to your banker with soil tests rather than just cash, or an open hand, in the case of many of us. And so, okay, wow, if I could get a 1.5% rate drop, that's a huge difference. And then maybe with landlords recognizing, if you could use soil health indicators, or arranging for different rental rates rather than a flat rate across the whole quarter section, you allow, as in a business agreement, for those eco buffers, riparian zones, pollinator strips, and you build into it because it's good for everybody. And then if realtors are aware of this and land buyers, they know that an acre is not an acre, and each acre has different values. And then there's policies with other groups that are willing to say, look, we're willing to pay you, like Alice will pay you agricultural rates to leave the fringes of your field alone. So now it's no risk. Like, I don't have to put in $300 to get back $350, or in potato world, whatever it is, you don't have to put in $10,000 to get back $15,000. All of these things add up and they start to become a big part of an operation. But none of it's like, no one's getting rich per se, other than the land and society as a whole. And if we can recognize that as a society and create these ways for those who are stewarding the land, I think there's some real possibility.
I love that, Tim. Just a more holistic lens on these things, is really making a difference for sure. Cedric, I know you're so passionate about this topic. You could talk about it 24/7. What are you most excited about when you think about soil health and looking forward in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I'm excited about the leadership, I guess, or leadership isn't the right word. The participation of the value chain and the recognition by the Nutriens and Suregains and McCains of the world that they do have a role to play, and this alignment within the stakeholder community on taking responsibility for this. And we're seeing a mindset change within, I know, local growers here. There's a lot more no-till, a lot more reduced tillage. We're seeing those cover crops going down, and as your innovators, that 3 to 5%, maybe 1.5 to 3% of innovators get out and start to show that it can be done at scale, then you see that early majority coming on and picking it up. So that's good. That's good to see. We're also seeing governments, I think, put their money on the table. Programs like OFGAF. We've got the Living Lab initiative that's studying these things and validating these things and working to support producer adoption. And then again, the value chain players coming through. You see Nutrien working with ducks, getting some perennial land cover down, incentivizing that. McCain's, General Mills, all looking to incentivize these practices that Tim has described. So, I think that's the most exciting and encouraging piece for me is everybody stepping up and playing a role.
There's so much happening in this space. It seems, every week you're hearing something new and encouraging. So it's definitely a time to be optimistic for soil health. Final question. Our time flies by in these discussions. This podcast has a really special magic wand. I'm going to give you both the ability to give a piece of free advice to every farmer in Canada, current or future. So, Tim, if you can give a message to every farmer and rancher in Canada, what would you say to them about soil health?
we move in the direction of the things we pay attention to. So just pay attention. And then as you walk on your land, you're recognizing, wow, this is a living biosphere. What can I give to it? What of myself do I cherish that I can give to this, that it might bring forth life? And if we orient ourselves towards the landscape and the soil in that regard, we're going to make advancement for sure.
Cedric, how about you? Magic wand, piece of advice, every farmer and rancher in Canada.
When you look at the soils as a system, I always envision a house, and the organic matter and the microbiology that lives within the soil. They're building a house. That's the system where they're going to live, right? And our plants, grow within that. When we put steel against that house, it comes apart pretty quick, right? Every time we have that significant steel disturbance, it has to try and rebuild that house. Now, I've been a no-tiller for 20 years, so this is easy for me. I know it works. I've made it work, and we've seen that, grow and evolve. Again, programs are helping to buy new equipment capable of doing the job at no-till. We know it can be done. So the piece of advice is, ladies and gents, leave the iron parked, get out the no-till drill, don't tear down the house. You can do this, right? It's going to save you fuel and labor and erosion. And, we're talking, what are we talking dirt in London, Ontario? $25,000, $30,000 an acre. Here in little old Carleton County, land's going for $10,000 in the potato belt, right? So that's a significant investment. That's a significant value. Treating it right, letting that house live, let the microbes and fungi do their thing. You can do this. It will work. Give it a shot, seek some advice, get the right gear, make a change.
Love that. Wise words from you both. Big picture right through to really specific. I love that so much. Thank you both for your leadership and your insights and your commitment to continuous improvement in agriculture. It takes people like you to talk about these things in a really practical way for people to be inspired to say, I can do this. And together we can keep moving the needle a little farther and a little more holistically to really make a difference. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone for watching and listening. We'll be putting some notes on the YouTube channel, so please check it out, and we'll see you soon.